If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The research is staggering of how many people go to their deathbed with major life regrets about the things that we didn't do as opposed to the things that we did. If people don't share their truth, they'll never be fully free, and they won't free everyone else around them. Just imagine it's your one last talk. Maybe it's the story you're embarrassed about. Maybe it's the thing you want no one to know. But when you deliver that truth to the world, someone somewhere is going to hear that and go, I am not alone. I think ultimately it all comes down to connection.
I've got 2 young boys. I'm trying to connect with these new beings. What do you usually tell your clients when it comes to connecting with children?
Always be vulnerable with your kids. Allow them to see your pain. If I can be the best human I can be, I have the best opportunity to be the best husband I can be, and therefore be the best father I can be. When you have the courage to be vulnerable and show people all of you, you allow them to be human as well. Don't avoid the pain. Our greatest gifts lie right next to our deepest wounds.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
If you could do one last talk and say a few words before you died, what would you say? What would you talk about? What could you pass on to other human beings? And that's what I'm talking about this week with Philip Mckernan and his latest book, which is called One Last Talk, which is a speaker series he does around the world and gets people to speak their truths. And Phil says that next to your deepest wound lies your greatest truth. He tries to get people to go deep inside and talk about their pain so other humans can be inspired by that message. I love talking to Philip. He's been a guest on London Real for the past 3 years, and he always has really interesting things to say, like, what is your relationship with money? What is your relationship with relationships? He digs down deep and talks about how you spend time with your kids, maybe why you're obsessed with your business, and really gets you to ask questions about you, to go into your brain and make sure you're not running routines that don't make any sense with your life. So I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Philip. He really goes deep on some things, and he'll get you asking a lot of questions about your life, your patterns, your relationships, and your money. And speaking of money, inside London Real Academy, we are about getting your money. Our Business Accelerator teaches people to take their idea and turn it into a business. We put people on the TED stage with our Speak to Inspire course and broadcast yourself. You create 8 episodes of your own podcast in 8 weeks. Here's more about the work we do.
London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Real Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Philip Mckernan, the inspirational speaker, author, and filmmaker. You work with entrepreneurs and business leaders all over the world to help them seek clarity about their future and move through mental roadblocks. Your new book, One Last Talk, Why Your Truth Matters and How to Speak It, was developed through your speaker series and takes people on a journey to discover their truth and speak it out loud. Philip, welcome back to London Real.
It is so good to be here. So good.
It's great to have you here. It was 3.5 years ago, I think, when you first came to London Real, and you did a talk for our academy, I think the night before, and then we had an epic conversation. I remember the big phrase that always comes to my mind is, what's your relationship with money? And
Oh, yes.
you have a great way of really kind of digging into people's brains and pushing them to answer hard questions. And then we had you back, I think like less than a year later for one of our super focus groups, and people always ask me about you. And I remember you always telling me about One Last Talk. And I remember being like, yeah, okay, that sounds kind of cool. And I didn't know if I got it, but with this book, I now get it. And so I'm super excited for you to talk about, you know, this whole journey. So what have you been doing the last couple of years?
Well, apart from walking down streets and walking into Whole Foods in Boulder and having people say to me, I know you because you were on London Real, so thank you for that. I've been busy. I've been busy being a little unfocused in the early days, and I've been busy figuring out how I want to show up in the world and how my work needs to evolve. And I'm a massive fan of reinvention to some extent, but I think it can cross a line where you start to reinvent all the time for the sake of reinvention. So what I do will always stay the same, but how I do it needs to change to keep me on edge. And what's emerged for me, I think, in the last couple of years is One Last Talk is something that and it is a choice, but I feel I have to bring to the world because it's not about Philip Mckernan. So I think that's emerged as the thing that we're spending a lot of time, energy, and focus on, and bringing it out to the world, and hopefully being received well.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked about a year ago, you were always doing lots of things. You know, you're consulting with some high-level people in corporations, some some high net worth people, and then you're also speaking at events, and then you were doing this One Last Talk as well, and you were always so passionate about it. And you're like, Brian, you see these people when they get on stage, like this one woman, and everyone cried, and like, you were telling me these things, and I was like, wow, it sounds epic. But, you know, it was a lot of things you were doing, and I didn't know which one you were going to do, but I could tell you were passionate about this.
Yeah.
But then to see it come into this book, it feels like you went all in on this, because this is no joke to create something like this, and it's gotten really big. So when did you decide that this was something you wanted to push? Because also, you're not a guy for publicity. You know, you don't push yourself, you don't push your stuff, you let people come to you, which is, you know, I guess good and bad. I don't know. Tell me about that.
I think the biggest thing that emerged for me, and I had great people around me who have supported and challenged me, including yourself over dinner the last time I was in London, and we met, and you said it is a bit unfocused, and so it was another reminder for me that people were wanting to be involved in it or wanting to understand it, but be challenged to do so because they couldn't get it. And I think I was struggling with my relationship as it relates to One Last Talk. You talk about relationship to money, my relationship to One Last Talk. How do I fit into this, and how does it fit into me? And what I was trying to do was get this thing moving without being the center of it, because it's actually a platform or a space for men and women, in many cases, who have never spoken publicly in their lives before, to share a deep part of their truth or their personal narrative. And I didn't want to make it about me. But what I realized is, actually, if you are the visionary, if you are the founder, get out of your own goddamn way. If it's about you, it's about you. Don't let that inhibit it. So putting my name in this book, putting this book out there, I think deciding to write the book, actually sitting in Burger King. I wasn't at Burger King, by the way, not that I judge anybody that was. I came out of the gym and I was on the phone to the editor. I pulled in and I sat there and he said, are you going to write this book or not? And I remember saying, yes. And that was the moment. It was on 30th Street, I think, in Boulder, Colorado, where I live. And I said yes. And the minute I said yes, the universe started to conspire to make this happen in ways that I could not have imagined.
That's really fascinating, because I feel the same thing with London Real. I was always kind of hesitant to stick myself out there, and here's the guest, here's the guest, here's the guest. But it's only when I actually put myself out there and show things about my life that people can get it. So it's like, stop being selfish by not putting yourself out there.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, I think sometimes, and I believe this through the work I do, I think sometimes we're brought to some extent kicking and screaming to the very thing we're destined to do. And another example of this is that when One Last Talk was born, it wasn't called One Last Talk, it was called the Real Summit. And I wanted to create an event that would disrupt the event space to some extent. And we can get into that or not as the case may be as we talk about One Last Talk. But I wanted something different. And I find that I was in a shop.
Something real.
Yeah, I wanted something very real. Okay, and that was the point, the Real Summit. And this was about 7 years ago. And a great example of sometimes how we wait for perfection is I was in a store, and I think it was like Tibetan bowls. Is the bowls, you hit them and they vibrate.
Noises, yeah.
And there was a lady there looking, and I said to her, you're going to buy a bowl? She says, I'm setting up a podcast. And she says, I'm going to use it at the beginning and the end. And I said, when's the podcast going to be launched? And she said, when I have everything ready. And I said, like what? She said, all the equipment. It reminds me of this amazing studio. But of course, you didn't wait till you had this amazing studio. You started. And she was waiting, and my friend Ian Zabot looks at her and says, why didn't you just start on an iPhone and see what happens? So we started with the Real Summit, and the speakers coming said, but how do I prepare for this? Because you're saying I'm not allowed to speak about Donald Trump, I'm not allowed to speak about global warming, I'm not allowed to speak about Brexit. So what do I come with? And I just said, just imagine it's your one last talk. And every time I used One Last Talk, people had a visceral reaction. They went, oh, wow. And then we pivoted to One Last Talk because that was the thing that we really wanted to create.
Okay, and One Last Talk, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm about to die and this is my last thing I can say to the world?
Absolutely. And in some cases, we've had people who are sick with cancer, for example, and may not be on this planet as long as you and I or other people. But the essence is that you don't have to wait till you're dying. And I think that's the problem. There's a little analogy or story I heard recently about the man who went to the hospital to say goodbye to his father. And his father was dying, and the doctor said, it's time. And he says, he's passing away. And the guy said, no, it's time for the conversation. And this young man, his son, said, what conversation? And the doctor says, the conversation you should have had 20 years ago. Because the doctors see these conversations, these moments of forgiveness, these moments of I'm sorry, these moments of I'm proud of you. And men and women are waiting their entire lives to hear from their father, in many cases, if not their mother, I am proud of you. And sometimes they're building entire businesses, going to the Olympic Games. And I've worked with people in that capacity. And what they've yearned for their entire lives are the words they often hear at the side of, on the deathbed with the person they've yearned that from. I just want to bring that conversation forward. We don't have to wait that long. We shouldn't have to wait that long.
Right.
That's the purpose of this.
What are the rules and boundaries on this? So you can't talk about Trump and Brexit, and you can't talk about your company.
Yes.
So what are the rules? Because that's what makes this unique. It has guidelines.
Yes, very much so. The idea is that the talk you create, whether you choose to do it at a One Last Talk event or not, or you choose to do it with your family, or you choose to run a One Last Talk event, a little gathering at home, we're not controlling you.
Right, because you work with, professional athletes, CEOs, billionaires, but this is for anybody.
This is for anybody anyone on earth. We want them to go through this process. But the one ask we have and the one invitation we have is to deliver their One Last Talk to at least one other human being. Otherwise, it has no value. Otherwise, they don't release that talk, to the world, that truth. And I feel that everybody has a One Last Talk in them. And while the One Last Talk is about them, it's not for them. Because the bigger picture here is whether when you deliver a part of your truth, maybe it's the story you're embarrassed about. Maybe it's the thing you want no one to know. Maybe it's the thing you've forgotten about or tried to forget about. But when you deliver that truth to the world and you let it out into the world, to one person or a million, someone somewhere is going to hear that and go, I am not alone. And if they see value in your story, it might awaken them to believe that their story has value and that their story matters. If they start to own that, then they start to see that they matter. They then can get the courage and the conviction to share their truth. Can I give you a quick example?
Please.
There was a beautiful lady called Lena. She's just a stunner. And she's from Toronto. And I'd done some work with Lena. Lena came to One Last Talk in Boulder in Colorado. She sat in the 20th row, whatever it was. There's about 150 people in the room. And this girl called Neely stood up. and shared about, in her case, sexual abuse that no one in the world knew about other than maybe her mother. And she never imagined sharing something so personal, something that she had a lot of shame and a lot of embarrassment around, could free her. And she's going on to do a podcast to help women who've been in that situation after the fact. But Lena's sitting in the audience, and she's a dark-skinned lady. She's beautiful. And she's been developing white spots all over her side and all over her back. And in that moment, when she heard Lena's talk, her story came back, the story that she had buried. She had buried it in Pandora's box. She had built a motorway, metaphorically. She had built a skyscraper on top of it and said, that does not affect me. That is not going to hurt me. That is not going to control my life. And in that moment, when she heard Neely, she acknowledged that it wasn't gone, that it is there, that it is part of her truth, and that maybe she needs to begin to accept it and bring it back into reality so she can truly deal with it, so it doesn't grip her and control her. She left there and the spots started to dissipate. 3 months later, she stood on a stage. I asked her to, in Toronto, and told the story for the first time ever to anyone. And her brother was in the room about the day that she was sexually abused. And she said, the reason I'm standing here today is because if I don't share this, it's going to kill me from the inside out. And the second reason is because of Neely, who was sitting in the third row in Toronto. And she looked at her and she says, I'm doing this because of you. That's the ripple effect that One Last Talk is happening in the world. And it's somebody said it's like 5 years of therapy in one book. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they said.
Okay, and so the talk is about you, but it's not about you because it's something that you can pass on to another human.
Yes.
That can give them a value, a perspective, something.
Yes.
Okay.
But you're not there to give advice. So for example, I was doing a speaker workshop recently. So we help the speakers craft, the ones that are going to go and speak at the event. And one guy steps up and he said, there's so many people in the world that are out of alignment and doing work they shouldn't be doing. I said, whoa, stop right there. I said, let's just make this about you. He goes, I spent 15 years working in areas I didn't want to work in. I said, great. Now you're not telling anybody. You're not pointing the finger. You're showing them and you're allowing them to come on a journey with you if they want to. You're inviting them. I think there's too many conferences out there where people are standing on stage telling you what you should and shouldn't do with your life. That's fine. We're just trying to spin it a little bit differently.
Right. So it's about my journey and my story and my talk. Yeah. But the ultimate aim of that is to add value to someone else
100%
listening. And okay.
Because if we don't do that, Brian, what's happening is almost everybody I approach goes, but I don't have a One Last Talk. Now my friend John, oh my God, you need to talk to him. Actually, can I get you his number? I go, no, I'm talking to you. But I don't have a One Last Talk. Almost everybody I've ever asked believes their talk, therefore they're saying their story doesn't have value. If we can awaken them to the possibility and the reality that that's not true, when people step off that stage, they look different, they feel different, and they give themselves permission to show up different in the world.
Yeah. I think I gave my version of my One Last Talk this last year with this movie I did called Iron Mind. And I went back to 16 years ago where I had buried this, drug addiction I had had and this overdose that I had had. And I had never told anyone, including my wife. And it all kind of came up in this atmosphere and training and going back to New York City in the same neighborhood and flashbacks to me ruining my life and ruining friends' lives. And I'm telling you, Philip, it was this dark hole in my life that I thought would never, ever, ever have any purpose. And yet by sharing it with people, it became this source of light for people.
100%.
And I was terrified, and to use the word heroin, and I remember I sent the email out because we did a kind of a weekly episode, and the video team was like, maybe we'll just say addiction. And I was just like, guys, we just have to go all in. And I sent this long email out and just released it, and nothing but positivity and light came back.
100%.
And now I realized that there was a purpose for me doing all that suffering now was to let everyone else know that it happened to me and it's okay, and then we can talk about it and we can move forward. But I totally get the purpose of you asking people to go inward. And I thought it was buried and it wasn't affecting me, but of course it was. So yeah.
Well, and I'm sure you've seen this, is, and I've always used this example, is Wayne Rooney, who's obviously a famous British soccer player, English soccer player. And I'm a big Man United supporter, and I just use him as an example. But I look at my 9-year-old Charlie, who idolizes Man United, looks at Wayne Rooney and sees him in the limelights, playing in front of 70,000 fans when he played for United, and scoring goals and driving the big cars and making all the money. And my little guy is idolizing him, putting him on a pedestal, and dreaming about being him to some extent, but only knowing one side of the coin. And everybody's got darkness, whether it's in the past or it's in the present or it's going to be in the future. We all have darkness. But if Wayne Rooney turned around and said, listen, guys, to my son or anybody else, just so you know, that's what you see here, but this is the truth. I'm not asking to download everything. I'm not asking to get dark and deep and, kind of say, don't be a soccer player. But just give Charlie both sides of the coin. It's not his, there's a moral obligation, I think, sometimes when you're in the public domain, just to allow people to see some of your truth. And I think what would happen if he did that is people would move from idolizing him to loving him.
Yeah.
They would not put him on a pedestal, but they would love him. And I think when you have the courage to be vulnerable and show people, all of you, the warts and all, I think people then, you allow them to be human as well. You allow them to give themselves permission to name their mistakes.
Why is it so counterintuitive? Because when someone does open up, almost always they are showered with, like you said, love. Like I said, that no longer an idol, we now love them. We want to connect with them. We want to feel and know they're real. And yet most people won't do it. Yeah. In the public eye, it's a no-no to do that. Like, will we ever get over that, do you think?
I think we're getting over it. I think that the challenge, and I said this last night, we ran an event, One Last Talk event in Dublin. I think the challenge is that people are now using vulnerability as a mechanism to sell or to, I suppose, to manipulate to some extent from a marketing standpoint. And I think now what's happening is that's turning people off. So there's the happiness movement, then there was the authenticity movement. Now it seems to be vulnerability is the latest, sexiest thing. But if you sit in an audience or even on television, you can tell. I think if you just shut your eyes for a second, listen, you can tell when somebody's just trying to be authentic for the sake of it, as opposed to somebody who's sharing a part of their deep truth because they're ready to do it. And they're tired of carrying the burden. Okay. And they're tired of pretending everything is awesome on Facebook every day, because it's exhausting. I know what that feels like. It is exhausting pretending to be something you're not. I did that for 37 years of my life, and I still do it to some extent today. You never stop doing it. I think the moment you think you've stopped doing it, I think you've become complacent. For 37 years, I was definitely trying to show the world or pretend to the world I was something I wasn't. Trying to pretend to myself, for Christ's sake. And it was absolutely exhausting.
What makes this different than a TED Talk? I'm sure you've been asked that. How is that different? Because similar time, you ask people to tell these stories. It's the other kind of format that people know. How is this different?
Well, I think TED has done an extraordinary job, and its ideas worth spreading, and that's the point. And a lot of it is very intellectual ideas about science and the future, and that's great, and there's a great place for that. But this is not about anything that lies outside of you. It's a part of your personal truth, and that's the invitation, that's the ask. And the minute you start talking about something else, even by saying, here's the 3 things based on the life I've lived, I think people should do, the minute you do that, you're kind of pointing the finger. So it's about showing a part of your personal narrative, a part of your personal truth. And your story and your truth can often be very different things. My story is where I was born, where I went up, where the school I went to, or the college I didn't go to, the job I had. The truth was, like, what was the essence of who I was, how I was feeling during those times? What was the pain that I had that no one knew about? What was the joy I experienced? So it's not all dark stories, but there tends to be an emphasis on some of the more painful things, because our greatest gifts lie right next to our deepest wounds. And I really believe that. And when we can accept those, we free ourselves and we accept all of our stories. Because many people have, if you think about life as a book, most of us have a couple of chapters in our lives we'd rather forget. Or we'd rather go, geez, I like Brian's chapter 8 or 9, and Philip's chapter 1. But Jesus, I don't want those chapters in my life. So they're walking around this earth, trying to fit in, trying to stand out, trying to do whatever it happens to be, but yet they're basically rejecting a significant part of who they are. Those 2 chapters that they're ashamed of, they're embarrassed about. If they can start to accept them and bring them into their life, they're accepting all of who they are. And they give themselves permission to achieve success that ordinarily, I believe, they will sabotage. I really believe that. And I've seen it. I've absolute evidence of this. When people share all of who they are, I promise you, you already know this. Because of the movie you did, I guarantee you're going to experience more success because you've shared all of you with the world. People are going to want to lean in. They're going to want to be close to you. They're going to want to know you more. They're going to want to support you more. They're going to go, wow, there's guts. There's a man who has the courage to share all of his story.
What do you tell your students and people that are reading this book and they're in chapter 4 or 5 and they panic? I can't go there. I'm having a panic attack, Phil. I'm remembering this thing that happened to me when I was 8 years old, and I got to stop. What do you tell those people? I'm sure you deal with them live, but even if someone's watching us, like, what if they get really close and then they can't go there? What do you tell them to try to get them through?
Put the book away. There's no point. I don't want anybody pushed to the edge. This is not about pushing somebody right to the edge. So they're so uncomfortable with the talk they're about to deliver, or the talk. Forget about whether they deliver the talk, because this is not what this conversation is about. This is about doing the talk for yourself, going through the process of going through the different exercises and understanding who you are at a very, very deep level. You may never want to give the talk publicly in your life. That's okay. You don't have to. But I would ask them to, if something starts to come up like that, put the book away. I mean, it's obviously something that's new or something that is old, but is new in terms of how you're, like, you haven't dealt with it, you haven't named it. And maybe it's time for you to get some therapy or go to see somebody or get some expertise to help process that if you feel that it consumes you. I want people to be able to share a part of their narrative that pushes them a little bit, but not to the point where they get lost in the pain of it. Okay. There's no purpose to that, because they'll get up and they'll do a talk at an event and you'll see that they're just so lost and consumed by the pain. They haven't done any work on it, really. And that's no good to anybody. You're disrespecting yourself in that case.
And what are these events like? And what are the people in the audience like? And yeah, how do they kind of play out?
So what's very interesting is we literally ran one in Dublin last night, and I was concerned about the Dublin market. I often say that, or the Irish psyche to some extent. I always say that people will get to an event early in North America to sit in the front row. People will get to an event early in Ireland to make sure they get the back seats.
What does that mean, though?
Meaning that they want to be there, but they don't want to be seen to be there. They want to be there, but they don't want to ask questions. They're intrigued, but they're not all in. Okay. And they've got one foot out the door and one foot in, so they can kind of, duck and dive if they need to. However, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a smaller One Last Talk local event. So these are local events that we're running around the globe. And so there wasn't a big audience. It was a beautiful, kind of very intimate environment. And eventually they warmed up. But in America, they're a lot more forward with their questionings and their curiosity. But you'll often get people in the room who just want to hear their own voice. And they want to tell a story. They almost want to do a One Last Talk in the room, and I got to obviously manage that carefully. So it's a mixed bag, and then you get people who get stirred up a little bit, and it stirs up stuff for them, and they want to process that in real time. And sometimes there's an opportunity to do that with me, or not, as the case may be.
Okay, and did 4 15-minute talks?
4 15-minute talks last night.
And then afterwards, you answer questions.
Every time the speaker finishes, then we have an opportunity for audience members to expand and ask a question, and then I will support the speaker if required, because some of these guys and girls have never spoken before, and that's a big thing. 80% of the speakers, at least, around the globe have never actually spoken publicly before, and that's something we wanted to change in the speaker space, because we believe that some of the greatest gurus at events are not on the stage, they're in the audience. And we wanted to give them an opportunity and give them a voice to support the world. And so yeah, no, it's a fascinating, and to see them come off a stage going, God, I did it. And then to hear the feedback, people coming up and hugging them. And I just get to sit back and watch this unfold. And then they look at me and go, somebody really liked my story, and they're going to have a different conversation with their daughter because of my story. And it's like, I say, yeah, of course. And then it's very hard to describe the how that pans out and how that feels to witness that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, like, look at my choices when I want to go out for a night out in Dublin or in London. It's blockbuster movies, it's concerts, it's everything that's not going to be real. And yet we crave humans sharing these painful experiences that remind us of the human condition and that we're all part of this. But in this day and age, it seems like there's a lack of these things.
Yes.
It seems like we've engineered them out of our life. Like you said, we've got the Instagram feed, we've got the Netflix thing, which means we can really just consume media that's designed for us to tell us what we want to see or hear, or happy stuff. But that doesn't really make us grow. No. So,
well, we're avoiding pain. A lot of us are avoiding pain. Like, people avoid me. And as you said at the very beginning, like I poke people.
They avoid you.
They avoid me like the plague. I mean, I was at an event recently. I walked in. There was a guy sitting over to my right in front of me, and I've seen him 3 years in a row at this event. And I leaned out. I said, "How you doing?" He said, "Good." And I walked up around. I said, "How you doing? We've never really got a chance to meet." And he goes, "Because I've been avoiding you like hell." And I went, and I kind of laughed. And he goes, "No, I'm serious. I love your work. I watch everything you put out there, but you scare the shit out of me." And this guy runs a multi-million-dollar business. He's got a beautiful family. He's got his shit together on the surface, everything else. But I represent a kind of a mirror. And, you know, people often say, "Oh, Mckernan will make you cry." No, I won't. I'm not that powerful.
Well, I've seen you make some people cry.
Well, no, I create an environment where perhaps they need to cry.
Okay.
And perhaps I'll ask the question, or maybe I'll just push something a little bit further, and maybe the emotion comes out. But I can't make somebody cry. I actually don't believe I can. So, but he said to me afterwards, and we sat down joking, and I said, "You're serious about that comedy?" He said, "Yeah." And he said, "I know the stuff I need to deal with. I just can't go there right now. I'm afraid that once I open that box, I'm just going to get lost in it." But I worry about how that's holding him back, and where it's holding him back, and where it shows up, leaving me aside, whether it's me or somebody else, is by not addressing that stuff. What is the cost? What is the cost? Maybe there's not a cost, but I see that there is a cost.
Yeah.
Peace of mind, or clarity, or connecting, allowing people to connect to him, deserving success, sabotage. This shows up in so many different ways.
And when you go and speak at these events, and I've seen you speak, you know, in front of a couple hundred people, and, you know, high performance people, that kind of thing, you know, certain themes come up with these people, right? I mean, you're literally in real time drilling down to these people a lot of times and evaluating the surface versus what you think is down inside and what's really going on in the heart. What are these themes that you see over and over again? Or what are sometimes you think that the story people are telling themselves versus certain reality and relationships with certain things in the world? What are some of these common elements?
I think identity. I think a lot of people lose themselves in what they're doing. I think from a business standpoint, we talked about, you know, athletes and sport, and you know, with the film that you just did, Iron Mind, you know, where you talked about, is this an addiction? You know, these you know, triathletes and everything else, and I'm not suggesting it all is or it all isn't, but on occasion it can be. And I think what we do is we lose who we are into what we do, and it becomes our identity, which is fine initially, and it's fine maybe in the middle of it. But it eventually runs out when you sell the business, or the business is taken away from you, or you retire from the business, or whatever, is that at some level you're going to be challenged and it's going to be taken away from you. And then we start to struggle to find out who we are, because we basically lost all of ourselves in that. So that's number one, in no particular order. Number two is I often see people climbing a mountain towards success, whether it's a business or a multi-million-dollar business or whatever it happens to be. And they get to the top of the mountain and they're unsatisfied. And I think we've talked about this in the past, is they're successful, but they're not satisfied. And they wonder what's wrong. And then what they do is they look across the horizon, meaning life, and they go, "Oh, I just picked the wrong mountain." So when I climb that mountain, they pick the next endeavor, and they go down and climb the next mountain. And it's another 5 or 6 years of their lives. They climb that mountain and the same pattern happens. But they've never stopped to ask themselves a couple of very simple fundamental questions: what is the pattern here that I'm unwilling to address? What am I not seeing? Am I doing these things for me, or am I doing them to impress somebody else, etc.? And the other area I see probably the greatest pain or disconnect is relationships. So many entrepreneurs and leaders that I meet and work with tell me that they have a great relationship with their wives or their husbands or their children. And it turns out that when we take the time to really explore that, it turns out that that's not the case. But they're telling themselves it is, so they don't have to address the truth. But yet deep down, they know they're not as connected as they could be. So there's a couple.
Is that because it'll always be that way when they're spending so much of their time in their business? Or is it because they're not doing the things they need to do to make those relationships better?
The greatest gift that I get, the most rewarding work I do, is not when an entrepreneur says, "Oh, I now spend 2.4 hours a week based on my new app, more with my children playing with Lego. And I've monitored this for the last 6 months and I'm up 2.4 hours. It's when someone looks at me with conviction and emotion in their eyes and go, "I've become the father I never imagined I could be. I'm connected." And it's not about, this is nothing to do with time. It can be about time, but rarely ever is. So, because entrepreneurs often think, "Oh, if I just spend more time at home, if I turn off the laptop and I turn off the computer, that's a measure of how connected I am." I know many entrepreneurs that are on the golf course, but yet they're feeling guilty about not being in the office. They may as well be in the office. It's a complete waste of time. Or they're at home and I was going to say the BlackBerry, I would have aged myself, but the iPhone is off. But they're there and they're thinking. And I'm not saying there's no sin in thinking. It's just that they're finding it really hard to connect, but they've never learned how to connect. They've never been schooled in it. And I find that at the end, and the research is staggering of how many people go to their deathbed with major life regrets. And a lot of the regrets are around about the things that we didn't do as opposed to the things that we did. And a lot of it's about connection. In the end of the day, I think ultimately it all comes down to connection.
It does, right?
In the end of the day, all and connection with self.
Right.
They don't have great relationships with themselves.
Talk about that, because I see over and over again, people I meet in my line of work now, whatever the hell this is that people ultimately just crave that connection. And with all of our technology these days, it actually makes us less connected.
Yes.
And I think that's why people watch our show, because they watch someone pour it out for an hour and a half and really connect with a human in a way they haven't felt that in a while, but they crave it and they crave it. So I'd love to talk about that as well, but talk about with the connecting with yourself, because that's an interesting point.
Well, I think this is the most fascinating connection, our connective opportunity, or relationship in the world. I mean, a lot of people would say it's God, and whatever you believe in, I respect it. But I believe the most important relationship is the one that we have with ourselves, or the one that we don't have with ourselves. And I think what it would be an amazing just question, or something for anybody to consider watching this, is that when was the last time you spent quality time with yourself? Without your phone on, without your laptop on, without a movie, without a book, without anything. It was, when was the last time you literally, and I encourage every one of my coaching clients, not every one of them does it, by the way, just so we're clear, every single one of them to spend at least minimum 2 days and 1 night away with themselves, minimum once a year, but ideally twice a year, like every 6 months. And I remember one client going, so you could just see, he was like, just so, and he was like, and he was just getting, he was squirming, like he was so uncomfortable. He goes, so like, well, what do I do? Like, it's a strategy thing. Like, I brainstorm? No. But what do I do? And he goes, you just hang out with yourself. And he goes, I can't sit in the car without the radio on. You're expecting me to go away for, and I said, I'm not, I'm just asking you to consider it. Do it or don't do it. So he rings me about 4 weeks later and he goes, quick question, just a bit of clarity about this thing. I said, yeah, go for it. He goes, myself and Chris, who was on the coaching program at the time, he said, we're both going to go away together, but we're not going to hang out during the day. We're going to sleep in the same, house, whatever. Is that okay? And I said, what do you think? He goes, probably not. I said, great. Well, get off the phone, stop wasting my time. And I put the phone down. He came back and he just said it was the most painful thing. He did it. He went to a place called Tofino on the west coast of Canada, or Vancouver Island. Beautiful area. And he said it was the most, he could not spend the time with himself. Now it's changed. And as a result of him getting to a point where he was comfortable enough in his own skin just to have time with himself, it's improved every other relationship in his life. Mm-hmm. It's allowed him to connect with other people in ways that he never imagined. Because what's our benchmark, Brian? When I say to myself, let's just say I have a girlfriend and I just say, myself and my girlfriend, we get on great right now. She's amazing. What's my benchmark for that? What's my historic precedence for that? Is my last girlfriend or my friend's girlfriends or whatever. But what if it could be so much better than it is right now? I'm always intrigued. I'm a greedy bastard in that sense. It's like, let's just say it's 80%. What if, I want another 5% out of that relationship. I want another 10%. And I find that we spend a lot of that energy in our businesses trying to get the next bit of productivity, but a lot of us don't take the time to say, actually, hang on a second, how could my relationship with my kids be better? Well, when I retire, when I build this business and then I have enough money and then I'll be able to take them to Bahamas. I don't know one adult that I've ever met that I've worked with in a coaching capacity said, I wish my parents had worked harder. I wish they were less present and made more money so we could go and have more holidays together. Never met one.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting when you see people either say, I'm working till later one day, spend time with my family. Or the other one I love, this old chestnut, is I'm doing it for the kids. I sacrifice this for the family. And I actually rewatched the whole Breaking Bad series recently. Don't ask me why, I got hooked on it in a holiday. And I watched the whole thing and I watched it differently. And the whole time Walter White is like selling meth and risking his life. And he's always like, I'm doing it for my kids. I'm saving millions of dollars for the kids. And in the very last episode, he said, you're right, honey. I was doing it for me the whole time. Yeah. For my ego.
Yeah.
So how often do you see that?
All the time.
All the time.
And all I say is, that's cool. Now, are your kids okay with that? And I go, what do you mean? Have you talked to your kids? Have you sat Johnny and Mary down and said, now kids, your dad's not going to be as present as he could be. He won't be at some of your soccer games. And if he is, he'll be on the mobile phone or whatever it happens to be. And I'm not sitting here pointing the finger and judging. I fall into the same trap. I still do this, Brian. My kids still take me on and say, Dad, you're on the phone or whatever. So I'm not here preach. I don't want to be preaching and say I have it all figured out, because I don't. But if you're doing it for your kids, just make sure they know so they have a choice in this thing. But don't assume that they're going to be okay with your choice. And one of the other areas I see this a tremendous amount is where people go, okay, I get it. I've watched enough of Brian's episodes. I get it. I'm not in a career path I want to be in. In fact, I'm miserable. And I'm doing something every day that kills me. But I just don't have the clarity about what's next. And a man put his hand up at an event. I spoke in Vegas with 600 people in the room. He put his hand up. He said, okay, I get it. I don't like what I do. And I said, great. I walked up to him. I looked him straight in the eyes. And I said, so what's the question? He said, well, how do I get the clarity about what's next? Because that's the only thing that I'm missing in order to make a change. I said, okay. Dangerous story, by the way. Dangerous statement. And I looked at him and I said, I'll tell you what the problem is right now. And he says, go for it. And I've never met him before. 600 people, how would I know him? And I said, the pain's not bad enough. And he said, well, number one is I disagree with you. Number two is, how would you know that when you never knew me? We've never met before. I said, I can see it in your face. And I said, I'll prove it to you right now. He said, okay, go for it. And I said, how long have you wanted to get out of this industry that you're in, this job that you hate? 14 years. I said, excuse me? 14 years. I said, excuse me, can you say it louder? He goes, okay, 14 years. I said, exactly. Do you have children? He goes, yeah. I said, give me the name of one of your children. And let's just say he called him John. I said, how old is John? He said, 8. I said, let's fast forward 20 years and John sits down in front of you and says, Daddy, I'm in a job I hate. It's miserable. It's killing me every day. It's annihilating who I am. It's killing my soul. What would you say? I hadn't finished the last syllable. Get out. Get out. Don't do that to yourself. Why would you do that to yourself? Get out now. And then he caught himself and he looked around and he just goes, oh shit. So I said, that's going to be a lecture in 20 years. Or the conversation doesn't even need to happen, because that boy is brought up in a house with an inspirational father that puts value on his own skin and makes a change and doesn't wait. And when you do that, your son will learn from you every single day. And yet that man's justification was a lack of clarity, but also he stays getting a paycheck doing something he hates so he can send his kids to private school.
Now, did your comment give him the clarity? Probably not.
No.
No, because there wasn't enough pain yet.
I think if my memory is correct, I said, with respect, and I hope I'm wrong, I don't think you're going to make a change until the pain is bad enough. I was going to write a book, Brian, called Wake Up Call. And even if I do, no one needs to buy it, because the premise, I'll just tell you very quickly. And I've done a lot of research and I've done a lot of interviews with people who've had a wake-up call, meaning a fairly major life thing, whether it's depression, an accident, facing their mortality, somebody close to them dying, whatever. And if they change, sometimes they don't, and I think it's purely down to a value in their own skin. If they just go back to smoking or back to the same lifestyle or whatever, I think it's a value thing. But the ones that do pivot are the ones that do change. If I had to really oversimplify all the research, it sums it up like this. Every one of them simply give themselves permission to do the things they always wanted to do, or to take the risks they always wanted to take, or to adventure in ways they always wanted to do. That's it. It is not any more complex than that. And my job is to try to get people just to wake up a little bit sooner, but just the ones that want to wake up. And I'm going to share, can I share one more little nuance? Because I had a phone call with a girl about a month ago. Let's call her Mary and let's call the company Google. Her name is not Mary and it's not Google. And I said, why are you here today? Like, why are we on this call? She says, I want clarity about what's next. I realize that what I'm doing is not fulfilling. I said, great. So what is the number one block for you making transition? She said, you know what? I think I'm just comfortable. Now, there was a time not long ago I would have accepted that and moved on. I went, really? I said, you don't look comfortable to me. I see a woman who's in a lot of pain, but is unwilling to feel the pain. And she burst into tears and she says, I'm in agony. She's telling herself a most dangerous statement on earth. I'm comfortable. She may as well be lying on a bed of nails. She is the most uncomfortable person I've seen in a long time. But she's telling herself this story that is, I'm happy. No, this is great. I'm not asking everyone to question everything all of the time. That's exhausting. But just on occasion, turn out, am I really as good as I tell myself I am? And if I'm not, why not?
And so simple answering that question to you by saying, you're right, I really am miserable, might give her the opportunity of giving herself permission to make that move.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just even naming the fact that you're not as happy as you're trying to be. And then you can start to see your life for what it really is. Maybe he's not treating me with respect. Maybe this job is not for me. Maybe this city I'm not meant to be living in. Maybe there's a career path out there for me that has yet to be uncovered, has yet to be found. And a lot of people put hopefully I can get this to make sense, but a lot of people put a lot of emphasis on the execution. So people say to me all the time, oh my God, you're so brave. You moved from the country you love to North America to reinvent, to try whatever. Or maybe in your case, wow, what an achievement to do a film, numbers of films, but to do a film, like what an achievement. And I get that, and it's great. But the real courage comes when I was sitting in Ireland questioning my reality. People don't ask about that. And to sit there with my wife who's sitting outside this door, outside the studio, and to sit there and go, is this really it? Is this as good as it's going to be? Is there something out there for us that we have yet to find? What's possible for us? Is our greatest work yet to come? That was the courage. The execution was just the byproduct of that. Mm-hmm. People who have the courage to stop and ask themselves very simple, very fundamental questions without the need to just allow the answer to come, they're the most courageous people on earth.